I wouldn't have one. I'd be floating around and he'd be like, and he'd remind me, say, Karin, I hired you for ideas, for these ideas that you have. That's a point of view on the world that not everybody can do. And so that to have somebody see you and to encourage you and to let you know there's a path where you could be your best artistic self is part of mentorship, I think.
Karin Fong is an Emmy Award-winning director and co-founder of the legendary studio Imaginary Forces. She's directed iconic title sequences for shows like Boardwalk Empire, Counterpart, film titles for movies like Spider-Man: No Way Home, and has even directed titles and in-game content for God of War 3. She's been able to work on the kinds of projects most motion designers dream about when they enter the field. And today, she's on the School of Motion podcast. So in this conversation, we talk about how Karin approaches conceptual thinking and coming up with ideas, how art direction works at Imaginary Forces, and we dig into her thoughts on developing talent, the business of title sequences, and of course, I ask her for her take on AI. It was, and I mean this, an honor to be able to talk with someone as accomplished as Karin, and it doesn't matter how much experience you have, this episode has got plenty for you to take away. So, let's meet Karin. Karin, it is amazing to talk to you. We've actually been talking before we started recording this about our children and traveling and all that, but I'm really excited to talk to you about motion design. I've heard your name forever. I've watched a ton of your work since, way before School of Motion. So it's awesome to finally get to talk to you. Thanks for doing this.
Well, thanks for having me on, Joey. It's such an honor to be here. Love this program. Tipped into many of these podcasts. Super cool to be on it myself.
Well, that's awesome. Well, so I want to just, you've done other interviews. I actually spent all day yesterday listening to your Chris Stone interview and some of the talks you give me. Yeah, no, so I know you really well, but I want to make sure everyone else gets a sense of who you are, because you've been in the industry for a while, but there was a time when you weren't in the industry. And was interesting, I got on your LinkedIn and I discovered, you went to Yale, which is not the place I think of, award-winning, Emmy award-winning director designers coming from. So I was wondering if you could start there. Maybe tell us how you ended up at Yale, and what was that art program like? I picture Yale as where lawyers go and stuff.
Yeah, a lot of people do, but one of the funny things is Yale has one of the first, maybe the first, but one of the first art schools in the country. And so they actually have the Yale School of Art is quite, prominent. And I really wanted to go to do college somewhere that had, I knew I wanted to study art. But I also was really interested in a lot of other things like writing, history, the whole liberal arts section. So to me, that school was a great fusion of, both, the traditional things you would study at school and an art school. And the way I got there is a little funny. When I was little, I always wanted to be a greeting card designer. I would draw them, I would study them. And I think some of that idea of setting up something on the first, panel and then opening and it's some kind of funny joke or pun or something is just appealing. And my favorite greeting card artist was Sandra Boynton. I don't know if if you Google her, Sandra Boynton, she does those really fuzzy cats. You'd recognize her stuff right away. I'm sure many of you have gotten a greeting card. And she does now children's books and all sorts of things. She has a whole illustration universe. Anyway, I had read that she had gone to Yale. And sometimes it's just one of those things where you get tipped off of a place, and I started looking into it, and it's gotten into my head I wanted to go. So there you have it.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I went to Boston University, and this wasn't the reason, but part of the reason was Howard Stern went there. So, same idea. So what was the program like there? I mean, as far as, now having been in the industry for a while and what skills really matter, when the rubber meets the road, what was the program like, and what were the valuable things you learned there?
Well, Yale has I was lucky to be there as sort of switchover point. I don't know if you know this either, but a lot of the, classic graphic designers that we admire, like Paul Rand, taught there. My mentor, Kyle Cooper, went there. It's so funny. There's a lot of history, a lot of graphic design history there. But it was also the program was switching over, and the head of the program, who came I think my sophomore year, was Sheila de Bretteville. And she really encouraged this idea of having a voice as a designer, because Yale, has a very prominent program in painting, sculpture, photography, other fine arts. The graphic design program, I think, draws from that a lot. And so there's always this idea that the designer isn't, necessarily the handmaiden of all this, or like the hands, right? Like there's a point of view and an expressiveness and a body of work that you could build as a designer. And I think that's what the school really imparted on me. At the same time, when I was going there, which was, a few decades ago, we would joke, we would be so envious, I remember, of Art Center. We'd say it's like a country club there. They have color printers and color monitors, because this is a time, I'm old enough where it wasn't a given that your monitor would be in color. And so technologically, maybe we were, it was very classic education in the sense of, doing gouache studies and hand placing type. And one of the, I hope it's still true, but one of the cool things about the schools that all of our dorms, most of our dorms had their own letterpress in the college, not just the art school, just like we were all in houses, we call them colleges. But there, at the time I went, there were 12 of them, and each of them, you would live there and have your dining hall there, and you would have all these things in the basement, and most of them had a letterpress, so you could join a letterpress club, even if you weren't an art student. So it was very much the idea of graphic design and art is always very much folded into your daily life there, which was really great.
That's interesting. So I think about this a lot for obvious reasons that. We have a lot of students at School of Motion that never set foot in a traditional classroom to learn how to do design and animation and use the software and all these things. And, I think my stance has softened a little bit over recent years. I used to be pretty militant, like you don't need to go to traditional school, mostly related to just how expensive they've gotten and the sort of the student loan, bubble and all of that. But I have to admit that there are definitely things about that experience that are almost impossible to replicate online if that's all you're doing. And so I'm curious, what's your, what's your stance on education and the state of art education now? I mean, I know when I taught at Ringling, a lot of those students would go to imaginary forces, right? And there was this nice pipeline, and some of the most talented artists that I know actually come out of these traditional art programs. But also, there's a lot of amazing talent that comes out of School of Motion and other online schools. I'm curious, as someone who's on the receiving end of that talent, how do you look at education and how it fits in with the industry these days? Yeah,
it's interesting, and it's changing all the time, especially post-pandemic. It's interesting as well when you speak of online and learning things yourself. I think about we work a lot remote still. We still have an office, but everybody has parts of their team now, I feel like, that work remote, and you're talking about almost like a, not just in schools, but industry phenomena, like what value there is of people together or not is huge. And I've taught as well. I've been lucky enough I used to years ago have a class at Art Center. I've taught workshops at Cal Arts or workshops years ago at RISD. And when I lived in New York, I did share a class with Todd St. John. We used to teach at the Yale graduate program as well. So, seeing all these different schools, but this was all, a while ago. I think the great thing about our industry is that there are so many ways, and I'm talking about not just design and motion, but filmmaking. There's so many ways to grow and to educate yourself. I do think that there is a value of classroom learning, and mostly because of the sharing of ideas and the collaboration and the things you just collide with when you come up against it. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think sometimes there's different ways to get it. Some people get it from work experiences. Sometimes it's, if they have fallen with a group of motivated people who make films together. I remember when I lived in New York, the teenager down the hall had was always into those 24-hour film competitions. Yeah. And so you would just see these bands of high school kids in the apartment next door making a film, and that's its own education too, right? I do think what I valued out of it was the community. I laughed to think to myself, it's the kind of place where, in our spare time, I had a friend who started his own campus television series. And I remember he was the one maybe who got me, I didn't know at the time, but he asked me to do his main title, and I had never seen Goldfinger, it's the James Bond one where they project the credits on her body. He's like, I want to do something Goldfinger. Yep. I'm like, what's that? And he's like, rents it, because these are things, I didn't have the internet when I was in school. He's like, look, let's do something like that. And next thing I know, we're borrowing a slide projector. We're breaking into a classroom where it's completely dark with no windows, so we can like project the credits on his body for his soap opera. And those are the things that or I did things for the school. Another friend, I did slides for her play, these typography slides for this theater production she did. So like that kind of environment, I think, is like super, super, the growth in that environment, whether it was like technically the classroom or just being able to be around people to collaborate and just push your creativity was like super important. But I think there's so many ways to piece together an education. Before we got on this recording, right, we were just talking about, I thought I was pretty brave for homeschooling our kids for a year. We did a year of travel, my family. But things like Joey's been doing, like you've been homeschooled, and there's different ways, there are blocks that you can put together, mm-hmm. and it's not all or nothing, right? Like, a lot of people have the misconception that, when you study on your own, you're really on your own. But that's not always true. Like, you can join, a club for, or have actually a teacher. It just means like you're putting together your schedule from different influences. And I think, some people would thrive being in a physical environment, and others take a more eclectic approach. So...
I think that's exactly how I look at it. And, I've talked, and I know we have Chris Doe in common, and I've talked about this a lot with him and other people who are educators that, college basically bundles a whole bunch of services together and makes it really convenient. And so you described the most college sounding thing ever, projecting stuff onto a dude's body in a dark room that you snuck into to like make something really cool out of it. It'd be very hard for like a School of Motion class to incorporate something like that, right? And I used to feel like, we have to figure out how to do that too. But actually, no, there's other ways to do that don't have to be bundled with a full college price tag. And that's I think that's the puzzle that as educators we're all trying to solve. Like, how do we create enough blocks so that the super motivated student in a country where there isn't an art school, a RISD, or maybe a Yale, School of Art, they can piece together these various things. One of the things that I know online learning, it can do, but I don't think it's as powerful as being in person, is mentorship. Mm-hmm. And you've already mentioned Kyle Cooper. I'm glad you brought him up, so I didn't have to. But yeah, Kyle Cooper, obviously, very well known.
Absolutely happy to bring him up.
Yeah. He's, a little bit of a name drop there, but it's okay. I'll let so yeah, Kyle, obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, I think probably the most famous thing in our industry is the 7 titles that he was responsible for. By the way, did you work on those, or was that before?
I did not, but one of my very good friends, I saw it happen before my eyes. It was we were at, how you got energy that you feel when something cool is brewing up, he worked on it, and my really good friend Jenny, all of a sudden I see her with like scratch board, and he had told her to scratch out titles, and she was trying all these things, and then he was, I knew, he Kyle's a maniac in the very best way. Like, every one frame cut, he would obsess with her, and it was shot on film, and a lot. And it's funny because a lot of it was done in that moment in the mid '90s where that bridge between analog and digital was happening, and then a lot of people took it to be digital design, but it was very analog in its creation, and it was exciting to be around it and to have it honestly launch us. Like, it was one of the pieces. We followed up with other work, but it was one of the pieces that helped launch Imaginary Forces, which it came together in 1996. So,
yeah. So he was your mentor. You called him your mentor. Yeah. And I think about that a lot. So like, I'd love to hear what do you mean by that? What did he do for you? Like, really? I mean, because mentor is kind of a vague term.
Yeah.
And so and it's different in a way than a teacher, right? So maybe you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, and a mentor can be a teacher for sure. And I've had, and just to, I've been lucky to have, many mentors. In fact, two of the people who, the managing directors of Imaginary Forces, like Peter Frankfurt is there, and I consider him a mentor, and Chip Houghton, but Kyle's the one who honestly who hired me. It was still our Greenberg Associates, RGA LA when he hired me, and I think when I credit him for seeing things in me and encouraging things in me that I feel that are my strengths. And so for instance, I'll give you an example. So one of the things I had done when I was a senior at college was an animated alphabet book. I've always loved Sesame Street, one of my all-time favorite influences. And, and it's funny, like, you have to go back, because I graduated, in the 90s. So, like, so technologically, I had taken it upon myself to do an alphabet book where I used Macro Mind Director, and I did these little vignettes, like in this alphabet book, you'd click on the letter C and you'd click on a chameleon and it caused it to change on the couch, and then the cuckoo clock would open and inside would be a circus with a clown out of a cannon. Nice. And like you'd click on all these things and they'd come to life. And I think what I really loved about it, was fun scripting and doing all that, but I really loved about it is creating these animations. I was falling in love with animation. I'd always done it before with a Super 8 when I was a teenager, but that's slow, right? You do it,
yeah,
and you wait, and you get it from the lab. And I didn't have an editing machine. I was like, whoa, Nelly! When I got Macro Mind Director, and I could see a ball bouncing like within minutes, I was hooked, right? So this was like my way of working that out. And he really was like, wow, somebody, my professor. Actually, Michael Rock told me to go and see Kyle because he thought my work was really cinematic, which I had no idea what he meant, because to me, cinematic meant Lawrence of Arabia, like beautiful vistas and widescreen, right? But but he was right. Like the way I thought is a way that is a very filmic language. Like when we do transitions, when we have clever transitions, that's not something that can happen necessarily in theater, right? Like, which was the precursor to film. Like, if you have like a face that becomes a mountain, or you open a door and it's another world. It's very cinematic thinking, and that's something that when Kyle saw that project, and you would laugh when you see it. It's like the production value of this thing I had done is like my son. I can do this on the phone now, whatever. But but it was my doodles, and it was these ideas, and he's like, you have these ideas. You're really good at ideas of how things connect. And he wanted to, and that's one of the reasons he hired me. And then I always tell people at work this, because it's kind of humbling. One time I was working on something and he came by and he said, and I was animating it as I used to do, because we were all in school. We all do every part of our project, right? From soup to, start to finish, right? Yeah. But I'm not that good of an animator. I did it, but like, I'm not that, that's not where my gift lies. And he would say, focus on the ideas. We can get you to work with somebody who can really animate, who can, and at first I was like, what, it's like insulting, like I can't animate my own stuff. But then, he was like, no, your strength are these ideas, or I need you to, lead this project and make sure that it's consistent in the way we want. Or, he's teaching me how to be a designer and an art director, and then a creative director and a director, really. And, and telling me to prioritize, always pushing me to have an idea, that was really important to him. And he instilled, like, sometimes I wouldn't have one. I'd be floating around and he'd be like, and he'd remind me, say, Karin, I hired you for ideas. For these ideas that you have, that's a point of view on the world that not everybody can do. And so that to have somebody see you and to encourage you and to let you know there's a path where you could be your best artistic self is part of mentorship, I think. And he was, he was hard on me, somebody, he pushed the quality, it wasn't. He would always say, there's so many things I learned, like I said, just do the best that you can in the time you have, and like really, like don't don't stop until the time is up. You can do the best you can. I'm trying to think what other, just even little things like, I know I never go meet with a client without being prepared to talk about something or show something, even if it's the preliminary meeting, just to have, just little encouragements. I saw mentorship too is like just leading by example in some ways too, of just seeing him. He would be up in the bay late at night with, we'd be trying to do the best we can with the time we had, and, and if a client had an idea and he disagreed, I saw him make a second version, and he'd be like, we got to do what the client says, or, we're going to solve that problem, but if we think it's better this way, we are still going to show this, which is double the work, right? Yeah. But like those kind of, things, are mentorship. Yeah.
So it sounds like, there's kind of like two aspects of it. There's the trade craft part, like, okay, here's how you handle this client situation. And it's the type of thing they don't teach you in school. You can only learn it, once you're out in the industry. But the first thing you said was he saw something in you, right? And maybe you didn't even know that thing was in you. And that leads me to a question that I love asking people in your position, which is, because you've now obviously been in the position of being a mentor to countless people, and you've hired, and you've probably got a pretty good eye for talent. And I'm curious what you think about this question. Do you think that some people just have gifts, or is everyone sort of like, there's a roughly equal amount of potential, but some people just work way harder? Like, is it truly a meritocracy? Like, if you just work hard enough, or do some people really just come into this world with something that lets them see the world totally differently, and that's their gift? It may not ever be my gift, even if I want it to be. Curious. Well,
that's a beyond design philosophical question.
It is.
But I have, I believe people have different talents. Some people are simply have more talent in a certain area than others. I'm in the hardworking camp myself, but it's true. But it's like a nature nurture thing. Like, can you just depend on that talent if you don't work? Probably not. And could you go towards that? Everybody, I think, has a shot at being excellent. So I don't think it's like you're done. But it'd be for me silly to say that like everybody's got equal talent in everything. And there are people, and there's different parts. Like I think I'm very good at ideas of expressing them, but maybe even, having a certain point of view that incorporates some wit or some, what I used to like to say called aha moments. But other people are really talented at making beautiful things. I find that really ideas. There's my secret. I think they make designing easier for me, because like it would be so hard for me to make something so stunningly beautiful to be as aesthetically beautiful as it would need to be as memorable and to be as heart-touching as it would need to be. So I'm always like on the crutch of like, well, if I have an idea, if I have something clever or a metaphor, then maybe, I have a shot at doing them, I'll have a way into doing the memorable work. But there are people who do just flat out gorgeous, like, oh my God, like that picture or that piece of type or whatever is amazing, And then other people are great at writing, writing an arc that's a real, like there's so many ways to be talented, and not everybody's good at every way. And I think that's something to bear in mind. Having said that, if you love something and you're working at it, I absolutely think there, these ideas, these crafts, the craft requires persistence and hard work, and and some people will be, as some people are naturally faster runners, or shoot a basket. There's just, that's the wonderful thing about working with other people, honestly.
So when you and I think we can use this guy as an example because we both know him, and we're going to give him a huge compliment here. So when I started teaching at Ringling, Jake Ferguson was a sophomore in my class. And I agree with you, by the way. I think some people just have gifts, and I would put him in this camp. Like, I'd say the first time he showed me anything that he had done, I realized he's a better designer now than I will ever be, no matter how hard I work. He's just got it. And he's gone on to, I think he worked on the Counterpart title,
we won an Emmy together. I mean, he's a huge part of that, for sure. And that was like, early on, like, he wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, he's probably, I don't know, like maybe 4 years out of school or something. But my question is, so, now you're a mentor. What do you do when you have someone like that, come into your orbit who, like, insane raw talent? And he did go to Ringling, so he did have some, actual training to know how to talk about design and stuff.
I don't
like
want
that.
to discount anything that any school gives to as our education sort of. That, definitely.
Yeah. But like, what do you do? How do you approach mentoring someone like that, where it's like, okay, here's this young artist, raw talent, maybe not a ton of professional experience yet. What kind of things do you look for, and do you push and pull, and how do you approach that?
What's funny is I'm always so flattered when somebody later says, "Oh, you were my mentor," or "You really mentored me," because I'm always thinking that I'm acting quite selfishly. I'm like, you're talented. I want you on my team, and we're gonna make stuff. I'm always like, what? I'm thinking honestly, to be honest, about a lot of the time the project. I'm like, wow, you're gifted. Let's take Jake's, in Counterpart. Like, clearly you're gifted in the, figuring out the 3D aesthetic of something. This job demands that. Let's figure out how you can work on it. And I'm a true believer in, like, I think it's probably because I learned this way. I was really lucky early on to just get a lot of responsibility. I'm not somebody who's necessarily a baby stepper. I'm just like, let's, if I feel like it's, that energized by the talent around me, or honestly threatened by a deadline, to be perfectly honest, we go into it, and I feel like that's where because we've all been there, right? We don't learn until we're on the spot in a way, needing to do what we need to do, right? You can read tutorials and build this thing, and then you're up against a deadline, and there's demands, and then all of a sudden you rise to it, right? And I feel like that's much of how it works. Even now, like, I'm learning all the time, because I have to rise to some new challenge, or new technology, or a situation I hadn't had before, or, make puppets, okay, and that's, and so I'm always that intern too, like, to somebody, there's, you never knowing everything, so I just, have people jump in, I think that's, and it's out of necessity for the job, honestly, too. I'm not gonna pretend it's always out of place of, like, teaching. It's like, oh, wow. But I do recognize that, there's nothing like, it's like, put me in, coach, like I always say, like, oh, you don't want to sit on the bench, right? You want to, let's make the most of your time if you're interning with us, or you have a set, stint with us, or whatever, or we have you, for whatever reason, a limited amount of time, let's try to get the most out of it.
See what you can do.
Yeah.
Well, you got to give people, the privilege of failing sometimes, I've heard it put, right? And so, okay, that's interesting. I mean, I guess I hadn't looked at mentorship that way before, but in a way it's like, to be a good mentor, you have to let go, and let them do it. Do you have any advice? One thing that early in my career, especially, I was horrible at was giving critique. And my problem was I'm a people pleaser, so I would feel bad giving it. And then there's people who they probably feel too good giving it, so there's like a yin and yang to it. I'm curious, like, what's your approach when you have to give feedback, like, oh, that's just not quite working?
Well, my favorite line is like,
that kind of,
this is fantastic for another project.
I love that.
Because sometimes it is, but we do have to steer as a creative director or director, you have to steer the ship, right? It does nobody any good for you to waffle, even though it's not quite right, or try to fix it, do this when we know we should start over, or we need to fix this thing, or it's not the right XYZ, to hold back. And because, I think it's a sign of respect too, to, like, when I really respect somebody, and I hope with clients who really respect me, they'll be straight with me, because they know we can work together. It's always like, when you think somebody's too fragile, or that's when you don't have that trust, right? You're like essentially saying, I can't trust that we're gonna go through this, right? So I want to operate from that level of trust. But it's taken me, I've done this for a while now. But in the beginning, I was shy about delegating or giving feedback a lot of times because I didn't want that feeling, because it's a bummer, right? I've been through things where I thought something was great and somebody, was like, no, this isn't right, or that's honestly sometimes been totally terrible, and like I didn't want to be that killer, that squasher, right? But I think, and sometimes now I'm getting to the place where I see people I've worked with who are now becoming art directors and directors who are sometimes ask me like, well, what that question you just asked me, and to me, I'm just like, well, don't be shy, about giving an opinion of where this should go. Be positive. I'm sure you're appreciative. I'm always appreciative. And sometimes somebody will come up with something that's like, okay, I thought I was going to go over here, but your idea is better. Okay, everybody, we're doing this, So, but you have to have, I think, you need to give constructive criticism. I think that's why I preach about, I always think too, like what I want from my clients, right? I want them, when John Watts or Spider-Man just says, I want this to be hand done from the get-go. I'm not like, bummer, I'm like, oh, he has an opinion. This is good. Like I can run with this, right? This is direction, right? So. Yeah.
So let's get into the business end of this. I want to talk about conceptual thinking, but before we started recording, you said something that I think I want to call out to everybody because you specifically, but even imaginary forces, I think, the general perception of people that get into the industry and they hear the name probably associate it with title sequences because those are the things you typically win awards for and they're big prestige things. And, if it's a feature film, like millions and millions of people see it. And it's really cool. It's the kind of thing your parents will understand if you tell them I worked on that. They'll get it. But
maybe.
Can you pay? Does Imaginary Forces pay its bills 100% with the proceeds from title sequences?
Oh no.
Maybe that's all position. Yeah.
When we spoke earlier about teaching, it's always so funny because, I love going to classrooms, teaching, doing workshops, doing crits. And always, or public speaking, honestly, and I'll always have students who are like, I want to be a title designer, which is great. I have to say, it's one of the some of the most fun projects I work on are title sequences. I love them for so many reasons, and not just because they're seen a lot, which is always kind of a thrill.
That's fun, yeah.
But for conceptual reasons, for the ideas of making metaphor, for it being about tone. But all these things are really helpful for doing all kinds of work. And I tell these students, it probably isn't enough title design work to just do it exclusively, nor would you want to. There's so much, our world right now is really full of so much short format film and video work, or long format. We've done even feature length films that incorporate the ideas of design with filmmaking, which is super exciting because when I first started, it was always existed, right? But it was an extremely tedious process. We had network television, and that's where you saw television. There weren't streaming channels and things on your phone. I'm sounding like a dinosaur, but that's the truth. And then just seeing the wave, the continual uptick of places where you see live action merging with design or animation. I remember when I kid, there's this film Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was a big deal because they put cell animated characters on top of live action. Oh my god, and now
amazing movie.
We do that. You do that with an on your face on the phone to your friend, and you're sending. And when I first started teaching, I had a video typography and motion class. And my assignment was, let's pretend everybody that instead of sending our friends letters or notes or your mom a Valentine's Day card, it would be a video you would send. This was science fiction when I started teaching. How would you express? It was a way to how would you express yourself with moving text and video? And now this is what we do. So anyway, all this to say, there's such a world of being so expressive with film, video, and design that title design fits neatly into. So no, I've always directed commercials. We do brand films. We do videos for large events. I've even done projections for an opera. Large scale screens, everything from like huge screens in Times Square to, but also small, social media posts on the phone. So it's like, yeah, it's the gamut, Video games are huge too. One of my favorite projects was doing like a trailer for God of War, but also all the cinematics or the Dreamtime cinematics for God of War 3 and Ascension. So like, it's all that thinking where you distill a bigger idea down to a very concentrated bit of filmmaking is kind of where our sweet spot is.
Yeah. And from a business perspective, I mean, I think, I remember at Ringling specifically, like every student wanted to work on title sequences because that's like the most creative, fun, blue sky kind of thing. And I think also something we're about to talk about, it's like the perfect place to use visual metaphor and to get really clever, right? But I don't know, I've never worked on one, so I don't know like what the budgets are like for those versus doing a Google product launch video, which I imagine is probably a little more lucrative, and has a little bit more like legs afterwards. They're going to have more work. You're not always going to have another Spider-Man movie to work on. So how do you balance it from a business perspective?
That's a very good question. I have to say, in the whole scale of things, and you've probably heard this, is that title design doesn't pay a lot of money. And it's funny because, it looks like it should. And you're like, wow, these are, worldwide. Yeah. But in the scheme of things, it doesn't, it's not the, and it's always like sort of like the comparison. Like I'd always heard like, and I don't model or shoot for Vogue, but the Vogue cover pays less than all the, back in the day, than the catalog models, right, because it's the prestige, it's the art prestige, shot. So I kind of liken it to that, so business wise, what we try to do too is like, it's really great when we can, and I think creatively it's just great when you can parlay the identity you give to these shows, these bigger worlds, into the marketing for it as well. When we did Mad Men, the buildings were so wonderful. I lived in New York at the time, then there'd be a building with the falling guy like plastered right on, and like Subway, and like it was integrated into the city of New York, and so it was a way it became so much bigger. Or my friend Michelle Doherty's Stranger Things titles, right? It becomes this bigger icon, for an in the cultural landscape for the film. So like, some of those. So getting, in the trailers and the marketing and creating that bigger world is also something, that grows naturally out of that. But in terms of business, whenever we can, like even, when you do anything for a brand, basically a show is a world and a flavor and a tone that you're calling people to, right? And then all brands have sort of like a brand world story, kind of like tone. And I feel like those are the skills that we hone in title design that can be taken to other places, and very specifically the storytelling too. Like it's funny, we were just talking earlier, and I had just listened to Justin Harder's a bit on this show, and I just remember talking about superheroes. We worked on a project for Google where we had to envision small business owners as superheroes, and it was like a documentary. So we interviewed, or we got materials from these stories of Google's small business owners and all the foes they had to fight, right? Like the people saying no, or bureaucracy, or we had to personify those into villains battling these super, so like, how do you that kind of thinking, and how do you bring that to a campaign, is something that we try to, push into the world as well. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good differentiator, right? I mean, I think a lot of motion designers, I mean, like that's primarily our audience. And when they get into the industry, typically it's because they saw something cool and they're like, I want to make things that look like that, right? And then you eventually figure out that like it has to look cool. That's kind of table stakes. What takes you from, like the average motion designer, to Karin Fong is the ability to think conceptually and to create narratives and stories that have these metaphors baked into them in this really powerful way. And I think like, I mean, you mentioned the Mad Men titles. I mean, A Man Falling, like that's such a powerful, and I imagine like, on the pitch for something like that, there was probably all kinds of ideas like, well, it takes place in the past. We could have it look really retro and all this, but no, it's just this, it's like this very stark thing. And the courage to be subtle like that, right? So I want to get into how you do that and how not just you, but like everyone at your company. Before we hear that answer, I have a question for you. Do you like being informed about the latest and greatest tools, trends, and news about design, animation, 3D, and visual effects? Of course you do, which is why you should be subscribed to our free weekly newsletter, Motion Mondays. This is a 5-minute email you'll get each Monday that will keep you up to date on new tools, great work, events, and news in the worlds of animation, design, 3D, and visual effects. Head to motionmondays.com to sign up for free. And now let's get back to the interview. I was always fascinated early in my career when I met people that like, you could say, okay, there's this, show on HBO, and it's about this Mormon family and this guy has 10 wives. We need a promo for it. And they would come up with like, okay, well, it's probably pulling him in a million pieces, and so we need to visual. And my brain just didn't work that way. I had to train it to do that. Where did that come from for you? That ability to like squint and see something that's not there and no one else sees it. And it's a metaphor,
I think it's just let's see. I've always loved puns. I'm terrible, horrible, like real groaners. Both verbal ones and visual ones.
Do you want to hear one? I can tell you
please,
one right now. If you want. Okay. Did you hear about the kidnapping?
What kidnapping?
Don't worry. He woke up.
They're awful, but. But I always I want to do the greeting cards, right? Greeting cards, you gotta have puns in, like Sandra Boynton, who I, eventually followed to Yale, had that famous one that has like a hippo, a birdie, and 2 sheep. So it's hippo, birdie, to you, U-E-W. Yeah. So like she did I was like, I want to do this as a living. I love it. So I do think of visual puns all the time as a living, which is sort of amazing to me. I always just like that. But I think I really like, and I always, it's funny, my kids are into them now, but like I always loved optical illusions. Like, like, is it a rabbit or a duck? Or, like the vase with the 2 faces, or, like, I think there's something
like Escher stuff,
I
right?
like, about one thing can always be another thing if you look at it a different way. There's just like that fundamental thing that is really like the aha moment. And we would always joke, in the studio, like way back, like there'd be, half of motion design is like, you pull back, and it's really a blank. It was like, like a pullback trigger. That's like a motion graphic trick, right? Like,
jazz hands,
like it turns, like the edge turn, and it's really, but the idea that like, aha, it's really, this or that is just really interesting to me. I think that's a little on two-dimensional, but like that. But the idea that there's multitudes and things is interesting, and then just honestly, the idea, like again, I think it just makes it easier on myself to like think like I need something to hang this project on, like a North Star, like a direction, because. Let's face it, like these, whatever project you're on, there's like so many directions you could go. Like these are big worlds, whether it's a show or, a video game cinema, or, these are, or the ad for Target, right? Like you could go this way, you could go that, you could focus on you could do the design of it. To me, like to be able to narrow down like what I'm exploring helps me and makes it more like a puzzle. In fact, when I'm one of my favorite parts of any project is like I'm brainstorming with other designers like what this could be, and like we're always like, oh no, I have it, I've cracked it. Like I'm like, have we cracked it yet? Like it's like a puzzle waiting to be solved. So I think there's that idea. And then honestly, because people do ask where the ideas come from, and I'd have to say, like, just number one is just like talking to, or like getting it from the show itself or the narrative itself, or the, like, my favorite, well, again, one of my favorite things is talking to whoever created the show or is directing it, who's providing the creative vision for this story, and just really digging deep, whether it's like for Boardwalk Empire, like visiting the set and then like reading absolutely everything about the Prohibition era, to Percy Jackson, like what do we need, who are the characters we need to talk about, what are you trying to do with the series even, and some of these conversations go quite, I kind of joke they're therapeutic, I think, for, it's like wow, yeah. what are these what are our real ideas and real emotions that we really want to get out of this,
Yeah. How do you have any tricks you use, or I'm trying to think. I mean, like, 'cause there's kind of two things you got to juggle, right? You've got and there's another project that I saw you spoke about at some conference. It's an older title sequence for Dead Man Walking.
Oh, Dead Man on Campus?
Yeah, that's right. Dead Man on Campus. Sorry. Yeah.
A little known MTV film.
Wow, that would have been a different film. Yeah, different film. Dead Man on Campus, which I guess was about, I vaguely remember when it came out. It's like these college kids want to try to get their roommate to be someone who's suicidal, because if that person commits suicide, they get straight A's for them. Pretty dark premise, but it's obviously a comedy. And, the concept that you came up with was, it's like an opening title sequence, but it looks like the SATs, but all the questions are about killing yourself.
Right, like how long does the rope need to be?
Exactly, like, how many milligrams of cyanide.
Right.
And that's interesting right there. But then on top of that, there's this layer of tone that has to be right, because that could come across way too dark. Like if it looked like the 7 titles, it wouldn't work, right? So how do you juggle that too? Now you've got this idea, that's a good idea. How do you then figure out, okay, it needs to look like this and it needs to feel this way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, and then you bring up a good, what I always like to talk about, a good part of doing these projects is, like, the most important thing is the emotional tone you're giving, because when it comes down to it, when you do these short pieces, and sometimes it's different. We do explainer videos. We do a lot of stuff with documentaries that explain something or give visual to a narrative. But a lot of these pieces are about just, it's an invitation, like you say. It's like letting people know what to expect, or even surprising, or giving them an appetizer. And it depends too. It differs between whether it's even a feature film or a series, because a series, you see it over and over and the story changes. A feature film, it's very specific, like this scene leads into it, you see something, and that, so tone probably has to be the number one consideration. And that, there's a lot of when you're thinking of solutions, that's definitely comes into play. Like, you could have an intellectually good solution, well, this is about this, but it doesn't give you the feeling that you need to enter the film or the story, and then in that case, it wouldn't work. I'll give you an example for that. I worked on years ago, The Cat in the Hat, and we did this Rube Goldberg machine for the credits, and because it was based on some of the production designers' props, and we were like, this is quirky and kooky, and like Mike Myers is the cat, and like this Rube Goldberg machine's like, making credits, and then at some point it went to Mike Myers, and he was just like, no, we can't. And we're like, what? We can't do that. Why not? Well, when people go to see The Cat in the Hat, they want that feeling at first that you get when you open the book. Like when you're sitting on your parents' lap, and it's that blue book with the cat. Like there's a emotional place that we need to start it from. And then you can go, you can then take them from that to this. It was a live action film, this crazy live action and Dr. Seuss inspired place. But let's start where people know, and that's what his idea was. What the story needed at that time. And so what we ended up doing is we did the Universal logo in the style of Dr. Seuss. We totally flipped from this elaborate 3D Rube Goldberg thing into like a 2D take on it that was totally based on Dr. Seuss's drawing. So just as an example of like, intellectually and, with some, with the production design and everything, this is what makes sense for the film, we thought. But taking a step back of like what people might have needed emotionally to enter the film, or where at least the filmmakers wanted them to be, we took that different approach.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. That's a good example, because it's like, okay, you had one idea, but then the filmmaker actually wanted to evoke maybe nostalgia would be a way to put it. And so then, okay, what are the tools you have at your disposal to do that? Well, art direction's a really good tool. So why don't we talk about that a little bit? And you sent me something that a pretty recent project that just wrapped up, which was the title to this Percy Jackson show on Disney Plus. And the titles are gorgeous, and it has a very distinct art direction. I'm sure there's probably different reasons for that particular project, but I'd love to hear you talk about, like how you approach art direction and how that kind of relates to tone. And maybe you can use that Percy Jackson project as an example, because there's this really cool like art deco look to it. Like, where did that come from? How do you make those decisions? What is art direction? I'm just going to throw it to you.
Yeah, and it's so funny when you brought that up. I worked on this project with Toshika Dama, and we originally had an idea for this that was much more abstract, that was much more about a family tree of the gods. And so this is another example like that Cat in the Hat one, where the showrunners where we did say to us, oh, no, this might be too intellectual, or it makes total sense to do a family, and it was, they thought it was beautiful, but they're like, no, we want to show more of that world of the Percy Jackson world. This is for people who don't know, it's a beloved book series, tons of fans, and it's based on Greek mythology. And so and this is a question I'll always ask for every project, like, what makes this ownable, right? What makes this design ownable? And what makes this show different, or what makes this brand different, right? Like, there's tons of cop shows, right? Or there's tons of XYZ, mob shows or brands that do this or that. But so, like, I don't feel like our work has done a good enough job if, like, you could take this title and put it on another show. Like, if it could just work for another show, then it's not specific enough.
That's really good.
So that's sort of like a litmus test. It's like, okay, like we're talking Greek gods, right? Like, so if Percy Jackson can also go on the front of God of War, then I failed. Like, it's not specific enough. I'm not saying that was that, but early on, I think it was Tosh who had found this amazing Diego Rivera mural. Oh, I'll back up on that point. So one of the things, if you don't know the story, is Percy Jackson is a modern day demigod. You find out, spoiler alert, he's a half, his father's Poseidon, and but one of the things that makes it unique is, like, it's basically, the story is going around America. It's present day America. So the gods live in Mount Olympus, but it's really the Empire State Building. And a lot of the series and the books is the journey across America and this quest. He has to find who took the lightning bolt from Zeus. So there's, but it's not in ancient Greece. It's not in Greece at all. It's not. So it's this combined sort of like a road trip across America and with Greek mythology. And so we're like, what are the forms that could inform that kind of journey? Right. And then there's Olympus itself is the Empire State Building. And as you know, it's an Art Deco masterpiece, and we're thinking of, like, now, what's classic Americana, like WPA murals, right? Or lobbies, back in the day, lobbies of banks with beautiful, paintings, right? And this was a golden age of American art, right? And Americana. And Tosh had found this mural that Diego Rivera had done, and it's, spectacular. Many of his murals are, and the things of different proportions and everything. And we're like, well, what if we had sort of a roadmap or a way of visualizing this mythology? Because that's what it is too. Like, these murals are mythologizing the American experience, like, from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 30s and 40s, right? You'll see, like, high-speed trains and factories right in the fields of plentiful grain, and workers and laborers, and cities like Chicago, like, this is a way that our culture, mythologized progress, right? Or our cultural greatness. So we're like, let's inject that now with Greek mythology and have the St. Louis, there's a key moments. And that's great because we can embed Easter eggs in it too, like key moments. They go to the St. Louis Arch, and there's a character that's in Vegas, and they're road tripping with Ares who goes by a diner, and so we could hint at all these things. We didn't do it in necessarily the order of this. It's not like you watch it and it's like replaying the story necessarily, but we took things that maybe will be in future, hopefully another season or other episodes, because this fan base knows all these references, and so we were able to hide a lot of Easter eggs in and reference a lot of the the gods and little details, and so that's how basically that came about, just like using that mural as a North Star, and then finding other artists of that period and really examining. And then honestly, like, we had an amazing team of illustrators. Jorge Artola was our lead illustrator, and thank goodness we found him. He was, he had done some, we had seen from his previous work that there was some nods to this kind of style, not exactly, but it was like, wow, it needed a lot of illustration. And we were working closely with him on all the drawings, as well as Ella Lee, who had actually worked with on a piece called Wheel of Time, amazing illustrator, and Ruthie Kim. They had to like do these illustrations that we'd work out through lots of different iterations, and color them and digitally prep them as well.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear a little bit about, I guess, because this is something that, to be honest, I still get confused about, and I know our students do. It's like, you're the director, and then there's sometimes, I don't know if on this one there was a separate art director, but often there is. And then you've got the lead illustrator, and then you have other illustrators, and all of this has to look consistent. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, this, we'll link to the titles. Everyone should go watch them, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see them as we're talking about them. But it's the Art Deco style just shines. I mean, it's beautiful, it's really cool, but it's also Art Deco with a little twist to it. Like, Art Deco typically isn't colorful the way these boards are, and so like I'm curious, like, where do all the decisions get made? Like, who was it? Your decision? Let's take Art Deco, but let's like blast it with color. Was that an art director? Was that a happy accident? Was that the lead illustrator? And then how do you lock that in and say, this is the style and everything on this project has to look this way? Because I assume there was like a team of many artists working on this.
Yeah, that is the job of the creative director, myself, and in this case Tosh, kind of like steering the ship. And as you know from doing many projects, there are phases of a project too. Not everybody's on at the same time. Like if the it's very important to, for instance, in this one, front load with the illustrators, because before you do the illustrations, there can't be animation, and so there's a pipeline as you go through different stages. But I'll just say, one of the most important stages, as we've been talking about this whole time, is the concepting, right, and getting buy off from ourselves, like convincing ourselves this is the right direction to take, and what does that mean, and then talking in this case. To our clients about, well, what the approach is, because they need to be, they need to buy off on it, right? And to do that, you have to, show key frames. Like, I think one of the most important parts is like, working up mock frames. And maybe this art never makes it into the final, but you're just like, okay, you see this Diego Rivera. Let's look at also, Thomas Hart Benton, who was also a muralist at the time. Let's look at the murals in the Empire State Building. Let's look at this, and let's envision Rockefeller Center, right? And and we also, this Art Deco illustrator we really love, Urte, and let's look at all these, and then let's start mocking up, just with a couple frames. What would that look like were it a Greek god in there? Let's cut and paste and let's see if that's pleasing, start to work out. And during that working out process, you're working out color palette, you're like sketching ideas, you're like, okay, I love the way, some of these Art Deco murals really, this is the age of American progress. They're like having steam trains, or trains go this way or that. There's a lot of transportation. It's a road trip across America. Let's do that. get our input from the showrunners too, like what scenes and what ideas are really important. Absolutely show Hermes, absolutely, we have Athena's not in it yet, but hint at her. So getting what the content is really right. And then, I don't devalue this too, like the actual value of just sketching out, even in chicken scratch, a sequence, right? Like, let's, oh, wow, can we have the sun turn into a roulette wheel? Can we, if we're going to do a road trip, could the hair of Medusa also be a highway? Like those kind of fun ideas. Those are, we're all kind of like, sketching that. But then ultimately, like, Tosh and I will kind of like sequence it. And I don't also discount this either, of working with our editor, Lexi. Even getting very crude frames, setting it to music, seeing what the pace is. This is all happening at the same time. But once we have buy-off, like we have a few good frames of like, they're like, this is an interesting approach. This fits our show. Let's you get the go to do it. Now we can actually hire Jorge, who is an amazing illustrator, get the team of illustrators, and we start to work up, and again, this is still wet clay. Jorge's working up what Zeus would look like. We need adjustments. Is it, how literal do we make it? That we don't want to show the actors. We want more the idea, like the way they be gods are mythologized. We're not showing they're not portraits of the actors. You know what I mean? But these are all decisions you have to make while you're designing, right? Should it be the actors? Should it be an idea of it? Should it go more classical? Do you need to, how literal are we going to be? And you're working up these drawings. And first, I think, it's always good to do sort of like a lead drawing first, like, or style frame, so we get the one that we think is the most finished. I think in this case, maybe it was the Minotaur with the sea or something. We knew we always wanted the Minotaur. And so we color, and then we color that frame first. So we get the palette going. And once you have a couple, hero frames, I feel that things start to fall into place. Like you can like point to that and be like, well, this is nice, but we established this palette, or we said we were going to be more graphic. Like this is, there's every little decision is, like how much shadow, do we track texture? We don't track, like you're doing this through the whole process, and you start to make a rule book for yourself. Our art director and lead animator Henry Chang on this is really great, even just bringing up those questions, because sometimes how much there are things that you don't think about, decisions that affect the look, like do we use motion blur or not, is like hugely affects the aesthetic sometimes. Or he put I think one of the things that really sells this as a beautiful mural is the kind of gilt, gold gilt. That really I think brings it into that Art Deco style. But so he's doing R&D on that, and while Jorge's finishing up drawings, and Ruthie and Ella are painting them, and Alex Rupert honestly was trying to think of a way we could possibly do AI to texture, like to color and texture some of the. It never got to that point, because I'm always trying to think of like what are the small things you could automate, if you could, to free up your artists to do the the actual artistry and spend more time on the drawing. And so we started thinking about, well, what could we do? Could we use their own drawings as a source, or their textures, and find a way to more quickly paint these environments? I think we'll get there at some project. You got to start working out the pipeline at some point, but so there's a lot of things going on at once. But we do have meetings, we call them dailies, where we review the work. It's like these kind of like group crits, and we're just like we hone in, and we keep everybody talking, and everybody. It's almost like school. You put up your work, and we're just like, this is great, but did we want to go, use gradients that strongly? Did we, client has a problem with Medusa looking too much, too much love one way and not another, so can we change your eye, so there's we go, there's quite a bit to manage to keep it on track. But that's the fun part. And then because you're working with people, you get everybody's bringing what they can to it, and then you get surprises, which is nice.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, when I asked you the question, I was sort of thinking like, I'm about to learn the right way to make this nice and easy, this process.
I'm sorry.
And I'm always, no, but it's like, but because I've asked other people questions like this, and I always get slapped in the face with like, no, you just work really hard until it's right, I mean, and that's kind of the secret, isn't it? And I think it really helps when you have amazing talent around you. Just on that note, there's always this like, it's not even a debate, but it's like a personal choice that every artist in this industry anyway has to make. Like, are you going to optimize to be more of a generalist, or like, hey, I can design and I can do 2D animation. I also know Cinema 4D. I can also composite and I can video edit, right? Or I'm an illustrator with a specific style. That's all I do. Maybe Justin Harder's a good example. He's an amazing illustrator and designer, but he doesn't really animate, he told me. He sometimes does only when he has to. He's a little bit more of a specialist. Is there a place for both at IF, or do you tend to work with one or the other?
I absolutely think there's a place for both. And I think that comes down to what you feel your personal strengths are and your interests, right? Because it's funny, I get a question from students all the time, like, what should I specialize in? Do I need to know 3D? I'm like, try 3D. Do you like 3D? Do you like that process? Right. Do you like the hours you need to spend to make something good there? You may hate it, right? Or you may just love it. You just might have found your new language, right? And I feel like that's, I think students should get a framework and try the different. I absolutely think whether you're at a traditional school or you're learning on your own, to not specialize too early, I feel like is super important. One of my mentors, my 6th grade teacher, who just passed away last year, sadly, Mr. Heck, would always wrote my yearbook, and I always remember this. Like, as you go down the corridor, make sure you try to not let any of the doors close. Just kind of keep. He's like, you don't have to close them yet. This is me, of course, graduating from I think 6th grade, so that's pretty good advice for a 6th grader. But people, still like when you're in college, like I don't. It's funny, like sometimes I think specializing too early can be a detriment. Now, you're hearing this from a person who knew that she wanted to study graphic design since she was 12 too. So, take that with a, right. But specializing, I think it is important to try things and then, see what you like. I love it. Like Henry is a good example of Henry Chang, who I work with all the time. And, or, one of our directors, Alan Williams, like also edits, like it's great when somebody has that ability to dip into, because even if you don't finish it, follow it to the finish, the idea that you can, so much of it is getting your idea, what do I need to get my idea out there and for people to see the potential in it. And so if you can put together a sketch, put together, have the idea, put together a little animatic, whatever, those generalist things, that's really helpful. And then if you're a craftsperson, forget it, like that can actually do the 3D and do the, or shoot or whatever. All those crafts are important. Having said that, though, I don't think there's a need that you have to, you can't be an expert in all of it. It's just, I guess there are probably some rare people, but it's pretty hard to be an expert in all areas. So I think once you find what really makes you click and what you're talented at, it's then you go deep, in those, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, or one direction, Like I said, I had to give up animation pretty early because it was clear that's not where I want to spend my time, and it wasn't going to be where I make the best contribution, But I'm glad I did it long enough to basically give enough notes to mess everybody up. No.
Enough to be dangerous. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's interesting. I haven't thought about it the way you just described it, where I'm trying to think of a term for it. It's almost like you have to have enough capability to bootstrap your idea into some form that other people can see, and then you can have your team make it awesome, right? But until they all see roughly the same thing, it's impossible. And so a generalist is going to probably have a little bit of an easier time doing that because you can throw, I mean, that's kind of how I always worked. I can't draw very well at all, but like I can draw a little bit, and I was a video editor, and I'm really good at cutting music because I'm a musician. So I can like make a pretty good animatic pretty quick. And then I hire a designer.
Right. You can get people to see what you see. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so okay. So this brings me to the last thing I think we'll have time to talk about today, which I'm dying to ask you about. You know, there's a tool goes by the name of AI, and you know, the promise of it is it kind of lets you get your ideas across faster. It's a little controversial, though. I don't know if you're aware of this. I guess I should have asked you before. Like, I want to make sure you're comfortable talking about this because, you know, Method is a studio like IF with like a long history, and they do amazing work. They got into hot water last year. Personally, I think unfairly, just for the record, over some titles they did for a Marvel series called Secret Invasion, and they used AI in some part of the pipeline to help craft the look of that, and they got beat up on the internet, as happens from time to time. You know, as of recording this, there's currently a little bit of a kerfluffle about a Wacom like social media ad that apparently used like an illustration that they claim they didn't know it was AI. It was actually, they bought it on Adobe stock. Somebody uploaded it, but it was clearly an AI thing. And so there's all these questions like floating around in the ether right now, and no one really has any good answers, but maybe Karin Fong does. Maybe, maybe you know. No, actually, I just want to pick your brain. I'm curious, like, how do you see all this? Like, what's your take on it? Do you think it's cool? Do you hate it and want no part of it? Like, what do you think about it?
I think it's cool. I mean, I'm pretty excited about it. I mean, because it's pretty trippy, right? Like this, like what these, you know, it's just another. It's scarily, you know, fast, and the way it can mash up and blend up things is, it's almost, and I know that it will change, and I'm sure as soon as, you know, we're recording this now, I'm sure by the time you get this up, this will have changed. But that's the scary part. It's just so fast. I like the idea of using it as a tool to mash up, almost like you were saying, to get your ideas across a finish line, or to, because, you know, we're already, right, let's all admit, we all pull things off the internet and you know, photo bash together just to see, like, I want to do something like this. Look, you know, I'll do it like a Greek vase. You know, I'll do it like a, you know, this will be very painterly like this, you know, and you know, it takes hours already to do that. And so I think anytime, because, you know, as we all know, our budgets are a little stretched. Anytime, like I said, like it could be used possibly to help the real art, the human artists, the artists do it, you know, like, would I like it to do wire removal? Absolutely. You know, would I like these there's certain processes, that maybe, you know, you wouldn't need people to, but they would hopefully free up your budget to actually have more illustrators, to have more painters, to have more animators. That would be my hope, that it's, you know, enabled, like it becomes that tool. I think where people get upset, and rightfully so, it's like, I think, was it, you know, is a quote, I think like Picasso once did a painting, right? And he did it really quickly. Oh,
right, the napkin story. Yeah.
Or I think he actually talked about Paula Shear and the Citibank, like you know, like logo, or the Traveler Citibank, you know, like basically if somebody does something fast, often it is because, like Picasso rightly said, like somebody had seen him, I think the story, like do a perfect circle or some piece of art quickly, right, in a Picasso-like way, and they're like, but you only took, you know, I don't know, 2 minutes to do that. And he's like, no, it took a lifetime for me to train to do that circle, right? That old nugget, right? But that's what AI is doing too. Like, oh, it does it so fast, but sure, you're drawing on humanities art history. Right. Sure, of course. Like when you have the library of art history before you, that's what. And so we have to be, I think, super you know, that's. I don't think that's where you get into trouble. Like it's right now until they figure it out, like how we can get the rights. I think it's most useful right now when you can feed it on your own things, you know, to possibly, we were, like I said, like, you know, could we do backgrounds faster with the artist's own art in there to do the multitudes of trees or buildings we need or something? That's interesting to me, and also to see how it might reinterpret in a new way, in which case it's a real tool for the artist. So that's really exciting. I think also quickly, I had to do some, it's funny, I did a project where the shots had to be AI because the subject itself was AI. So there was no ethical conflict, right? It was like about the use of AI, and it was interesting to actually play around and generate shots out of them, using the runway, using other and using honestly a combination of them, because it takes a lot, at least, and I'm a noob on it, so but like it takes a lot of manipulation still to get the elements and get them to work the way you want it to come together. So it's not like I don't see the human interaction going away any at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, a lot of people, we just did this epic end of the year episode, and one of the things we talked about quite a bit was that I think more last year, it feels like it's died down a little bit this year, but there's like a lot of fear from designers and even animators that, okay, one day you just won't need us, right? And I've played around with these tools quite a bit, and I think that's just not going to happen. I think for certain things it will, but like for the kind of work that IF does, the kind of work most animators do, I just don't see how the amount of control you would need to get exactly what you want, even if it's generating it for you, you might as well animate the thing, in some cases. I'm curious, are you nervous at all about this taking away work from IF, or, are any of your staff, have they raised concerns like, hey, I'm afraid you won't need me to do boards anymore because you've got Midjourney?
It hasn't come up so overtly like that. It's certainly the buzz of all. I went to a art conference last year called THU, Trojan Horse Was a Unicorn, in Portugal, and it was really the hot topic of all the panels, and and again, there were a lot of character animators there who work at places at Pixar, or like or do Magic the Gathering drawings, or like where it's very overtly illustration styles that honestly, I think that maybe lend itself to that. So I was very aware of all that. It's funny because I just came, like we just talked about, came off an intense animation project with a score, like a team of illustrators and hand drawing things. So right now my brain is like, whoa, no, I don't think the level of precision I would need isn't there yet, but I can't imagine, this is the very baby days of AI. I do think, and having just come off the writer's strike here in Hollywood, that there does need to be regulation, or a way of controlling what is copyrightable and what is how you can use people's creative output, because nobody's signed up to be fed into a machine and spit, and I can see the problem also just with our general artistic growth of like AI, generating so much so fast and then fed back in. That is it like the real human artistry becoming a less and less percentage of the final
right. It's training on its own,
right?
Exactly.
And I do worry a little bit of our relationships with our clients or our collaborators, where it gets so fast that it becomes a necessity to use it. Like right now it's a choice,
right?
And we can, and it's fascinating in a way, and it does spit out interesting things where it's like peanut butter and chocolate, sure, like I've got peanut butter and wow, it's great together. But like I don't want to see it get to a place that we've seen so much in our industry over the past decades anyway, of things getting faster, where it's a must that you have, the only way to do it is to go through AI, because that's the only thing that will be fast enough to satisfy a certain need, or that people think that necessarily writing a prompt as a brief or something, it replaces, my dad always had this saying of like, oh, it always takes 9 months to make a baby. And there's like, I feel like it's like a dad thing to say, right? But like there's something that will be lost if the gestation time of any of these things gets to a critical short level, that it's just not humanly possible to do the thinking and the nuances that, and the artistry that we we should be striving for, you know. That's what my fear is a lot of the time.
I was thinking about how, you know, these tools, like when I started seeing the output from them, I immediately tried to map how that output would work, doing the kind of work motion designers do, the kind of, you know, title sequences and explainer videos and things like that. And I'm having, to be honest, a hard time seeing how it's ever going to be, like, even just conceptually knowing kind of how these tools work. I'm like, is it ever going to be good enough where you could art direct it so carefully to work exactly in a David Fincher movie, and somehow still be faster than just doing it yourself? I don't know about that. And then someone on Twitter, I was looking for his name and I couldn't find it. Here it is. Noah Oust is this artist. And he basically said, you're looking at it the wrong way. This is a new type of content we're talking about. You can have, I think the way he put it was, you can go for aesthetics or you can go for virality. And they're two different skill sets. And AI is good at virality. And artists and motion designers and imaginary forces is good at aesthetics. And aesthetics just means quality, basically. I'm curious, I kind of wanted to throw that at you because that's not the, like, if I needed 500 pieces of social media content, I wouldn't think, oh, I need to go to imaginary forces. I'd think I need to find, you know, some 16-year-old somewhere who's using TikTok, right? And they would probably know how to use these tools. So I don't know. I don't even really know what I'm asking you, but like, I mean, you focused your whole career on creating these super high quality things, and now there's this tool that makes really kind of shitty but really fast, and you can, and if you have good ideas, maybe it gets a lot of clicks. Do you see any, is any of that interesting to you at all as a creative person? Like, oh, well, I guess maybe you could come to us and we have these brilliant ideas and then we can make, you know, Will Smith eating spaghetti, but we can turn it into something a little artsier. You know?
Yeah, you know, I think that's totally fascinating. I mean, just to be clear, I'm really interested in AI. I love playing around with it. I know our studio, lots of people, and we have started, like I said, even for the right things, generating shots. Like I said, it was, you know, an AI specific project that we had done, but it's interesting. And I think, like, you know, because the tools have changed, the media will change. And that's really I've seen it so much over, you know, my career where I started, you know, it was 100% you shot on film. I was doing opticals, you know, to get titles, like, which is, you know, on an Oxbury animation stand, you're shooting type. To get the type on the film, you had to shoot it like on a, you know, this BiPAC, you had to burn it into a negative. You know, we were still doing film outs as our deliverables, you know, cut to, you know, now any campaign I direct or do anything for, we also are delivering, you know, for you know, the 916 and the Instagrams, the square, and like, you know, and like everything from, you know, we had to do something that had to play on Times Square, but also on people's phones. Like, so, but the media, the way we consume stories and media, it changes with the technology, right? And this, like you say, the AI, you know, bomb, you know, that has gone off will influence content. And I think that's exciting. Like I don't think film ever made, you know, things changed. Film didn't make theater go away. You know, photography, people still paid. There's photography. Right. It changed, right? And there will be, you know, I'm interested to see, you know, what gaming, you know, does with it, you know, like with other, you know, how it influences it. And there will be I think there'll be super exciting things. And I wouldn't count us out of being in those content creators. I think that would be, well, we would miss out on a lot of fun, you know, like, and we wouldn't, you're right. You always have to pick the right production and media for whatever messaging. It's not appropriate to noodle over, you know, something that, you know, that will just be on Instagram, you know, on social media for a day, necessarily. Or maybe it is, if it's the, you know, the nuclear, you know, the seed of something that then spawns into, you know, we can't even know what these things are. Like, it's funny, like going back to when I was in college, like everybody thought CD-ROMs, we'd be reading on CD-ROMs, like that would be the new media, right? Like, so that's part of the reason why I did that alphabet. But in a way, it did come true. They're just called apps now. You know, like nobody our age when they were kids could be like, I want to do an app. There were no apps. You know, now there's a whole media of things like called apps, and you could do an app, and you can. My son's like programming video games. He wants to do it. He wants it on the store. This was not an option when we were kids, and there will be faster and faster more options, right? So, and will AI be a part of it? Probably, yeah. But yeah, no, we're in with change. We've been around for a while. You have to be in with the change. It's fun. It's exciting. But you do, but yeah, these questions people are bringing up about the ethics, absolutely, warranted, I think, too.
I want to say thank you to Karin for making time to chat with me, and also to the entire team at Imaginary Forces who have been consistently killing it and inspiring us all for 27 years, and I see no signs of them slowing down. If you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, then consider this a sign from the gods that you should click that subscribe button, because we've got some incredible guests booked this year, and you do not want to miss them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're inspired and ready to go come up with a brilliant, clever, conceptual idea for your next project. Show notes are available at schoolofmotion.com, and that is it. Until next time.